This is Office Talk with Annette Stepanian. Hey there, thanks for joining me for another episode of Office Talk. I wanted to bring this episode to you because one of the biggest challenges that I hear from folks just like you about running a business is selling. In particular, the challenge you guys are facing is trying to find more qualified leads and closing those sales. One of the first people that I think of when I have a question about sales and how to sell better is my friend Maria Bayer. Maria draws upon her experience selling software in corporate America, and today she works with creatives and entrepreneurs just like you and me to help us sell more effectively and authentically. In other words, to not feel like a total sleazeball when we are trying to sell. So I hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and I'll catch you on the other side of the episode. Hey Maria, thank you so much for joining me today.
I'm so excited to be here, Annette. Thanks for asking me.
Of course. You are my go-to salesperson.
Aw, thanks.
And when I have a question about sales, I just think Maria, which goes to show that you've done a really good job of selling yourself as the go-to salesperson.
That's good to hear.
So the reason why I wanted to bring you on is because I recently did a survey of my listeners, and one of the common themes was people needed help finding clients and closing sales. So I immediately thought, I got to bring Maria on the show. So Maria, if for some reason people don't know you, can you just let us know quickly who you are and what you do today?
Sure. My name is Maria Bayer, as you know, and I'm a sales coach for creatives. And I'm the creator of an online sales course called Irresistible Selling, How to Win Wedding and Event Clients You Love. And it's an online group coaching course, and it's based on a long, long history in my background of selling to corporate America and selling to big companies. And that's all I did for over 10 years. And so I took all of those sales lessons that I learned and all of the strategies that I know work, and I put those into a course for people so that they can book clients quickly and for more money than they're used to, because one thing I think most creatives do is they undervalue themselves. So I teach them all the things that I learned in my sales career that will help them do that.
So were you a natural born seller?
Hell no. Absolutely not. In fact, that's one of the things I love telling people is that you don't have to be a natural born salesperson. In fact, the people that I worked with in my career, the people that were always the best salespeople, i.e. the people that always made the most money, typically were women, and most often they were moms. And what I could assess from that was moms are really good with their time, and they're really good nurturers. And so they looked at selling from a perspective of you're creating a long-term relationship. And that's my philosophy as well. And I think they're just naturally good at it. And the people that are sort of quote unquote natural born salespeople, like the people you think of in the stereotypical sense, to me, those are the people that come across as salesy and icky and not the kind of people that we want to be. And certainly not who I am or what I teach my clients to be.
Yes, all of that. I'll take all of that. And it's I think part of the issue is because nowadays we are losing that face-to-face element. And so it feels a little bit more icky because you're not able to take those cues from people, like when you're sitting across the table from them, when you're, having a cup of coffee. It feels a little bit more transactional than kind of how I think about like the good old days of how business was done. It was like you would actually spend time nurturing that relationship in a face-to-face format.
You're right. I hadn't really thought about that, but you're absolutely right. So much of this is done over email and phone, and people aren't face-to-face as much anymore. But I actually teach my clients to be face-to-face with their clients because I feel that that's the best way that you can build value with your client. If you're in a type of career or job where you can do that, so maybe not somebody that's an Etsy seller, for example, but someone that's in the wedding industry, certainly you'll want to meet with your clients, because then you can, like to your point, you can take up on social cues and you can build that rapport with one another, which is really hard to do on email, which is another reason why I teach my clients, don't rely on email to sell your client because it's not going to work very well. So that's why I really encourage them to do more face-to-face.
Yeah, and it'll set you apart because nobody else is doing it. So
Right,
unless
right,
they're
exactly.
Maria's student, but nobody else is doing it. No, I mean, when was the last time somebody picked up the phone to connect with you that was, like to sell or to in that stage of the relationship? Not a lot of people do it.
Exactly.
Okay, so I want to know, let's kind of start at the beginning. When somebody wants to start attracting their quote unquote ideal clients or just people that they enjoy working with, what are some things that even before they've even picked up a phone or put out an ad or all that stuff, what are some things people need to be doing in order to attract the right people to them? I think there's a little bit of qualifying that needs to be happening in that process so that eventually as you bring them in and kind of close the sale, you're getting those right people in.
Right. There's so many steps to that, and so many different ways you can do that. And you certainly don't have to do everything, but especially when you're first starting out. And that's one of the things, like when you're early in your business, you don't necessarily know who your ideal client is because you don't have that much experience. And you know as well as I do,
My ideal
that
client is
changes.
the one that pays me.
Yeah, right, exactly. And that's what I tell people. I say in the beginning, I don't want you to take a nightmare client, but I do recognize that you're trying to get experience and build your portfolio and build your experience base. So not everyone's going to be a perfect ideal client. And I get that. But you have to take a stab at it in the beginning, and you know that you'll just course correct as you go along. But I like it to start with your website. So everything on your website should speak to your ideal client. So just take a stab at it and say, okay, if this is the person that I'm going after, and of course, that's more than just demographics. It's more than somebody that's in their 20s or is a female or something like that. It has more to do with what do they value? What's important to them? What are they looking for in a vendor like you? And being able to communicate that in the words in your pictures on your website so that when you go there, you're immediately attracted to it if you're their ideal client, right? So like, for example, there's certain stores that you go to their website and from the front page, like let's just say Nordstrom, for example, that either is or is not your style. Then you could go to something like Anthropologie and that may completely be your style, but Nordstrom isn't. Do you know what I mean? So that's the type of thing that you can do pretty easily on your website so that your ideal client is attracted to you. But then what I like to tell people to do is one of the most popular ways that my clients have established their businesses, whether they were just starting their business or maybe they just moved to a new city and were starting the business, in a new city. One of the things that they do is they network with other professionals in their industry so that they can refer each other. But one of the biggest mistakes I see people making is that they don't necessarily tell that other person, who is a good fit for me. And you really want to net it out because let's say you're a photographer, for example. Well, not every client's going to be a perfect client for you, right? Maybe you have a certain photographic style or you're looking for a certain type of client. Maybe you do like family portraits or you do, fill in the blank. But when you're networking with somebody, tell them that. Make it really specific. Say, these are the people that are a really good fit for me. And that way the person they're speaking with will know exactly when that person comes in front of them, they'll say, oh, yes, that person's great for Annette because they specialize in this or this is, their background or whatever.
And I just want to make a point. I think there's value in niching down for sure, because you can't be everything to everybody either. So, and then that's a process. The more you're in business, the more you realize who you like to serve and all that good stuff. You can't just say like, I just want to photograph brides and grooms. Like, well, what does that mean? You got to kind of niche it down. And I think the more you niche, it's scary to do it first, but the more you niche, it's almost like the more people come your way because it's very clear to them, okay, Maria does this. And so if you're in the market for this, you go to Maria.
Yeah. And you know what? That was such a hard concept for me to believe when I first started. Yeah. I just couldn't understand the concept. Like, why wouldn't you want to appeal to more people? But it doesn't work. I mean, if you look at people that you're attracted to in business, they almost always have a story or a specific thing that they're really good at or known for. They might be good at a lot of other things, but that one thing is what they're really making a name for. And that will help people self-identify and realize, oh, this is the right person for me. I want to hire this person.
Yeah. So let's say people are starting to get people on the phone, right? They've done the website. They've told their colleagues of what they want. And so people are starting to ring the phone or send emails. Ring the phone.
Right.
That makes no sense. You know what I mean?
Call anymore.
Yeah. Nobody uses the phone. I don't even know how to say it. Ring the phone. That makes no sense. Okay. So people are calling. People are emailing. How do you start filtering people out and qualifying these potential leads to continue to ensure that you're drawing in the right ideal clients?
Great question. Some of that has to do with your experience and finding what sorts of questions people ask you later on, or finding out later that, oh, somebody wasn't necessarily the best fit, and trying to work backwards and figure out, all right, what kind of clues did they leave? So I can tell the next time. So some of this is a bit of an iterative process, but other things are really telling. And this will be an example that you probably can definitely relate to. And that is, and we've talked about that recently in our Facebook group for my class, and that is people that are asking for a ton of contract revisions, right? So that to me is a red flag, right? Especially for a small business owner. It's a different issue entirely when it's a big company selling to another big company, or like what I used to do in the corporate world. That's a different story because those are huge corporations. But when you're selling to an individual and you have a contract to protect yourself and also to protect your client, you really don't want to be changing a lot in that. And if someone is asking you for a lot of changes, that's usually a big red flag. And I tell people to hold their ground and say, no, I'm sorry. These things are put in place to protect both of us, and maybe even walk them through some of the specific clauses that they have an issue with and tell them what the intention was behind them. But that to me is a huge red flag, because then they want to drive the relationship and maybe look for loopholes as to how they can get out of it, or, just not have the best of intentions. But I would love to hear your perspective on that.
I just think about or it's a sign that your client is a lawyer, because I'm just thinking about when I was getting married and, I was obviously entering into a lot of contracts with different vendors. Like, I think I didn't have a lot of changes, but I read those things pretty closely. And if there was something I didn't like, I asked for a change. And and I know it's pretty common because we just can't help, lawyers can't help themselves. I think to your point, I wouldn't say if they come back with changes, it's a complete deal breaker. I know some people have that mentality. I think you have to look at what types of changes are they requesting. So if it's making you change a policy, for example, let's say you're a photographer and you want to retain the copyright to all of your images, and that's really important to you, and they're asking you to change it. They want the copyright. Well, then that's a deal breaker. But maybe that's not a deal breaker for you. Maybe they have a reason why they want to have the copyright, and you're okay with giving them the copyright in that image. Then just be open-minded to see, I think know what's important to you and what's not important to you, and where you're willing to bend, because you still want to salvage that relationship if you can, or if it's an important relationship to you, but you don't want to do it when you feel like it's not on terms that you're happy with. Does that make sense?
Yes, I totally agree with you. In fact, I think if I didn't say this, then let me rephrase and say that if they're looking to totally rewrite things, or like you said, do something that really puts you in a bad position or is a deal breaker to you, like maybe terms or refund policy and things like that, that really puts you in a bad spot and expose you to a lot of either, negative things that you don't want, whether that's money or otherwise. But it's really good to understand, where is that concern coming from? So I always have my clients go back and try to understand, where is it coming from and what's the ultimate concern? Like, for instance, when I got married, my father had a triple bypass not long before that, before I got engaged. And I knew that he was sort of on borrowed time. And there was always this, nervousness that he might not make it to the wedding. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that I had asked one of my vendors for was, it had something to do with the deposit. Like, if God forbid he dies and we postpone the wedding, Can I either get my deposit back or use it at a future date or something like that? And, my request was very earnest in that, I'm afraid that my dad might die, and so it's important to understand that versus, and I think this is the example we were dealing with in our group lately, was somebody that wanted to totally rewrite like every single clause.
Yeah.
And that to me smelled of somebody that really wanted to have total control over everything and run the show.
Yeah.
And that to me is very scary, especially if they're doing it with a business owner that, a lot of people are just in business for a few years and they're not nearly as, knowledgeable about some of these things as maybe their clients are, and they might get pushed around. And at the end of the day, you want to be careful and protect your business because that's all you have, So I just want them to err on the side of caution and make sure that they're not entering into something, even though it might seem like it's a big contract and it's a good opportunity. Just be wary and not just say yes to everything.
So we're talking about different ways that we could qualify. So that was one thing from your experience. You feel like when someone's coming in and is negotiating a lot of things or trying to change the show, it's kind of like maybe I don't want this client. Any other questions that we could ask or things that we could look out for when we're trying to qualify people? Or maybe people don't even qualify people. They just take everybody that walks through the door. I don't know. It's what are the things that you're seeing people doing that they could be doing better?
I think one of the biggest things is understanding what your client values and knowing going into that conversation how they look at your service, right? So a lot of people, let's just take wedding people in particular. So there's photographers, there's planners, there's stationers, whatever, floral designers. Well, generally you have to hire each of those professionals, but you might not value each of those in the same way. Like one person might value, a photographer far more than they value the videographer, for example, or vice versa. So, and it's not right or wrong. It's just what they personally value. And so it's good to know getting into it, where they place your services, how important do they think they are, so that you know where you stand.
So what do you ask?
So you ask, how, there's lots of ways that you can phrase it. So it really depends on your business. But one of the ways that I tell people to ask is, why do you think you need a professional photographer? Or what are you most looking forward to most about your photographs from your wedding? Or, there's lots of different ways to phrase it. And sometimes it requires follow-up questions, because some people won't necessarily answer the question fully. So you kind of have to massage it and ask it in a couple different ways. But you're basically trying to say, how do you value photography for your wedding, or where do you place it in importance in your wedding on a scale from 1 to 5? That's another way. And you can give people, if you are in the wedding business, you could say, where do you value photography on your list from 1 to 5, or planning from 1 to 5? And that will give you a good starting point. And if they say 2, out of 5, then it's just a checkbox item for them. And they're just going to be looking probably for the most economical vendor. And you can decide whether or not that's you or you want to take a pass.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. You had this story about, I think it was some like interior designer or decorator, and he would always ask his clients, he had a question, a really good question. Can you tell that story?
Yeah, he was a very I don't know how well known he is, but he was a very high-end designer. And he designed someone very famous, one of their jewelry stores in New York. So he had told a story. We did an interview with him when I was working in the interior design area. And he did an interview with us. And he basically said that with every client, before, they hire him, he asked them, why do you think you need a designer? And, he was very quintessential New York and very bold and just asked the question straight out. And it totally worked for him. Now, for some people that directness may not work. So you might need to soften it, but he would ask them straight out. And the brilliance of that question, and the reason why I love my clients to ask that question, is it turns the tables. It forces your client to sell you on why you're important. And when they answer that question, they will tell you exactly what they need to hear from you to hire you. So if you say, why do you think you need a professional photographer? Or why do you think you need a professional photographer versus, the local photographer, from this big company, that has 1,000 photographers, or Uncle Joe that can take pictures on his iPhone. And how they answer that question is going to inform how you talk to them from a sales capacity. So if they say, oh, it's so important because I've got my great grandparents are really old and I really want to capture, our pictures with them so that we have them forever, and just the dynamics we have with our family because we have this big, huge family, et cetera, then you know how to sell to them. And that's one of the things that people don't do well or don't realize is that you don't just throw things at the wall to see what sticks. You ask really thought-provoking questions to them and find out what they're looking for and what matters to them. And then you talk to that. You speak to those points and you tailor your conversation based on what they tell you. And conversely, if you ask that question and they have a really crappy answer, then you can dig a little further to make sure that that's really what they mean. But a lot of times it's a red flag, and it means that it's not high on their list, right? They may want to have beautiful flowers or a planner, but it's not important to them. So that either tells you, A, walk away, or B, you've got to sell the value of what you're doing and educate them. So you can take it either way, but it's a way of qualifying so that you know where you stand.
Yeah, and I could see how having one-on-one conversations lends itself to this technique that you're talking about. But the reality is a lot of us are doing it via email. You get a lot of inquiries. How do you sift through all of that and get them to tell you why they need you if you don't have the benefit of having a conversation with them?
I force my clients to have a conversation by phone. I teach them how to do it. And I tell them, don't sell on email. If someone asks for your rates, do not send it to them, because if you do that, you're forcing your client to make a decision on price.
So what, you just pick up the phone, you're like, hey, totally happy to talk to you for 5 minutes to get to know what you need, and you just get on the phone?
No, I actually have them respond very quickly, because oftentimes the first person that responds is the one that wins. So respond quickly, show them that you're professional, and say, thanks so much for reaching out. We're delighted to hear from you. Congratulations on your engagement, for example, if they're a wedding professional. We'd love to, talk with you for a few minutes and have a brief chat to understand your vision and to make sure we're a good mutual fit. Which of these times works best for you? Or here's a link to my calendar. Let's schedule a 15-minute conversation. So that way you're telling them what the purpose of the call is for, why it's important, and you're making it really short and sweet. The reason why you want to do that is because I remember one of my very first sales managers told me, he's like, do you know what the goal of any meeting is? And I said, no. And he said, to get to the next meeting. So in other words, you need to get to that next step. And if you spend too much time trying to sell on email, it's not going to work very well. They're just going to ask you for your price. You're going to give it to them, or you're going to try to sell your value and build a case for yourself. But you're just doing it on email, and that's very difficult to do. You're not building any rapport. You're not building that connection. And that connection is an important piece, because you have to train your clients how to evaluate someone like you and teach them that it's not just black and white. It's not just that I'm going to give you X amount of photographs and I'm going to give you this many hours of coverage.
You're not just a commodity.
You're not a commodity. You have to sell yourself and teach your client how to evaluate you and how to judge that, right? And the only way to do that is to get them on the phone so that you can establish that rapport. Because another part of, especially if you are any type of service provider, to a large extent, regardless of what you do, a lot of the success that you have really depends on the synergy you have with your clients. And you don't get that, or you don't know what that could potentially be unless you talk to one another. It's like trying to get married on email when you never talk to the person on the phone. Or met in person.
Yeah. No, this is really interesting. I'm like processing all of this. I almost want to go back and listen to this conversation and take notes. What do you do then if you want to you don't want to waste your time if somebody can't even afford your minimum services or your minimum package. Or do you forgo that and say, well, if I can convey the value enough to them, it doesn't matter what my prices are, they'll want it regardless?
The answer is both. And what I teach my students is it depends where you are in your business. If you're pretty advanced in your business and you've been doing this a while, you're pretty confident in how you run your business and selling your value. Generally, that goes along with a higher price tag. Then you're probably going to want to put your starting prices on your website. You're going to want to put it in your email response to your client or on your inquiry form so they know where your prices start. And that way it weeds out the people that are not in your budget, right? So those people, I really recommend that they do put some sort of beginning price so that people know, and it weeds out just the people that are not going to be in the right budget for them or just a bad fit, But for people that are just starting out, I recommend that they take those calls anyway, because it'll help them practice, number one. Because one of the things that is important is when you're learning new sales skills, you have to kind of practice a little bit. And you don't want to practice with a client that you really, 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 really want. Because if you goof up, then you're devastated. So I like people to have like testing grounds and let them test on clients and see if they can get them to understand that value and say, you know what, that's worth raising my budget for. That's worth stretching to afford you because now I understand why you charge what you charge. And I have a lot of clients that actually are in that sort of mid-stage of business where they're not beginners, but maybe they haven't been doing it for 10 or 20 years, but they know that their client's initial budget, let's say just for example purposes, might be $3,000, but their starting prices are $4,000. They oftentimes will get on the phone with them, understand and know well how to sell their value and get their clients to stretch to afford them. And oftentimes even spend more than their minimum. So they went from $3,000 to maybe $5,000 or $6,000 because now they're good at selling their value and they're good at educating the client on why they're worth what they charge. Does that make sense?
It totally makes sense. And I was like, yes. How do you, it's so true. And I think it starts off with you first knowing your value, but it's like, how do you articulate that to people? I know that's something that I struggle with sometimes is, the law is important. You need to do this stuff, but how do you get it to a point where people are like, yes, I need it now.
That's a very loaded question. There's a lot of parts to that. But how to just articulate your value, I teach people sort of like a formula for doing that. And it's just different methods that I know from experience work really well in communicating that value. So for example, one of those ways is through client stories and examples of other clients. So when you're talking to your prospective client and they tell you that this is, their issue or this is what they're looking for, et cetera, then you can talk about another client that had a similar goal or a similar concern or similar whatever, and was similar to them in some way, shape, or form. And this is what you did for them. So it helps the client see that you're an expert, that you've handled this before. Like, for example, if I'm coming to you because I have a specific legal problem, I want to be able to tell you what my problem is and have you say, Maria, I totally got this. We've helped people like this before. For example, we helped, Joan. She had a similar problem. This is what happened to her, and this is what we did to fix it, and this was the outcome. And this is what she told me afterwards. She was so relieved that, she hired me because now she's got an ironclad contract and she doesn't worry when she goes into, her contracts with her clients anymore. Mm-hmm. So that's a great way to show people that you're experienced, that you can handle their problems or their issues or their concerns, and that you've got, a track record of doing that. So many people are just starting out, so they may not have those stories. So if you are somebody that does, by talking about that, it's really going to help you stand out. Yeah.
Such good stuff. I just want to keep picking your brain, Maria. And so I'm going to ask you, part of it, it's like, it's not common sense, but how do I articulate it? Like, it's just putting yourself in the other person's situation and realizing, well, what is it that you need to know and hear in order to take that next step with that person? So it's not I don't want to say it's common sense, because I don't want to make it seem like it's obvious and it's, there isn't like a appreciation or a study of it, but it's kind of just putting yourself in that other person's situation, in their shoes, and just knowing where they're coming from and really not thinking about where you're coming from, but where they're coming from, and being able to speak to that. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I think that's where really good questioning comes in. And to me, selling is every bit as much of asking the right questions as it is you, quote unquote, selling somebody and pitching somebody, because I don't really believe in pitching, so to speak. So in that scenario, it's really important to ask the right questions. Like, what are you looking for? And why are you looking for this? Why is this important to you? And really trying to peel back the layers of that onion to find that emotional reason they want to hire somebody like you. Like, what is it that you're really going for? Because they're not hiring a photographer for the photographer to come and take pictures. They're hiring them for the benefit of that service. The ability to have these heirlooms that they have forever, or this wedding photo album that they can give as their first heirloom to their first grandchild, so that they can tell their story and their story can live on for generations and generations. That's what you're selling. And that's what you have to get to with your client, is understand what is it that you're really looking for. And you have to kind of play a detective. And the more you understand your ideal client, the more you'll understand what really motivates them, what's important to them, and you'll know how to speak to that, right? You'll know how to use those client stories to show they had a similar desire or a similar goal or a similar value, and this is how we work together, and this is the value that we brought to them. So really knowing how to uncover that with your client and know what's important to them, and then speaking to that, that's part of showing your value. And then also knowing, a lot of times people are just not educated in what should be important to them, right? That's oftentimes the problem. And that's not necessarily a problem, so to speak. A lot of people look at it that way, but I look at it as a way for you to set the stage and really educate them on how to evaluate and choose the right attorney, for example, or the right photographer, or the right planner, or the right stationer.
Yeah. So let's say you are almost there. You've had this great conversation with somebody. You've communicated your value. You've asked all the right questions. What are some techniques that people can implement to convert that sale? So they're almost there and they just need to close the deal. Are there any recommendations you have for folks?
Yes. Interestingly enough, ask. A lot of people don't ask. They just wait for it to happen, or they think they're being nice and letting the client have an unlimited amount of time to make their decision. But the problem is, the more time you give people, the more time they'll just waste, and they won't make a decision. And you really want to give people as much information as they need to make that decision, so that they can make it on the spot, so that they don't have to go home and think about it forever. And so one thing I talk a lot about with my clients is they'll ask me, what are some closing techniques, or what are, how can I book them right away? And it's not always about what you're doing in that very moment. It's what you're doing leading up to that moment too. So how can you bake into your process the sense of urgency and the ability for your client to make a fast decision to hire you? So how can you do all the right steps in advance, so that by the time you get to the point where you're talking about pricing and you're showing them a proposal, that they're ready to make a decision? So it's not about tricking them into trying to get them to make a decision faster at the very end, because that oftentimes comes across as salesy and spammy and just slimy, when you give somebody like just an inauthentic reason to make a quick decision. Mm-hmm. But if you set up your whole sales process from the beginning to make it so that they can make a decision quickly, then it doesn't come across as salesy. It feels better to everybody, and people are chomping at the bit to sign with you. So it's not just techniques, but to specifically answer your question, there are certain things that you can do. Like one thing that most people don't do, and it's an important rule of thumb if you're selling to companies, is making sure that all the decision makers are in the room. And that's one thing that most people don't do. So let's say you give a proposal to a client and you know that, or maybe you don't even know that they're not the only ones making that decision. Then you've just given up half of your power, because now you're relying on that person to sell the other person that's making the decision with them. And that's suicide. So you have to know from the beginning. And that's why I like my clients to work backwards and say, okay, in the questionnaire that you give your clients before you speak with them on the phone, ask them, who's making this decision with you? And find out from the get-go. And that way it doesn't appear salesy if you talk about it at the end. So that's just an example of how can you work it into your process. So that way, you know, from day one that, okay, it's going to be me and my fiance making the decision, or me and my mother, or my mother-in-law, or whoever, because they've got the budget. Then you know. Go ahead.
Sorry, Maria. So what happens though? Sometimes what comes across is, for instance, I'll be talking to a client and they say, great, I just need to run it by my significant other. Or so it's somebody who is the decision-making authority within that business, but they might have a advisor that they like to run it by. So what do you do in a situation like that?
I would still want to know up front if that person is going to be involved in any way of making that decision. And then what I like to do is position it so that when you're going over the proposal, that they're in that conversation with the other person, so that both people are there, so that you can answer and you can tell them this. I like everybody in the room that's going to be making that decision. That way we can make sure that we answer everyone's questions and make sure everyone is comfortable and everyone can decide yes or no. Even if the answer is no, you don't want to hire me, you want to hire somebody else, that's okay. And I tell my clients that that's totally okay, but I want you to get to the point where you can say yes or no. And so that's why I like both people in the room at the same time. I've known people, when I was working with my interior designers, the woman that I was partnering with, she would never, ever get to a meeting if one of the people, let's say it was a couple, if one of the people couldn't make that meeting, she would cancel the meeting. So she was militant about it. She would have somebody call the day before, 2 days before, confirm that both people were going to be there. And if they weren't, then she'd say, okay, let's reschedule to a time where you're both available. Because she knew, even if, for instance, in the interior design world, let's say the wife was making the decision because she was the one that cared about it more, but she knew that type of a financial investment, you always did a gut check with the husband. She knew that, so she had both of them in the room at the same time. And that way she could make sure she answer all of their questions and make sure they were all on the same page. And even if it was a no, it was a no. But she didn't leave it to chance and only meet with the wife and then have to wait for the wife to talk to the husband and then play that chasing game, which I absolutely hate. And I don't want my clients to do it. So I want to give them reasons why they don't have to do it. So again, breaking that into your process so that at that meeting, whether it's a Skype meeting or an in-person meeting, I don't care, but have them both there, because otherwise you're leaving a lot of it up to chance and you're not stacking the odds in your favor. And in sales, the best thing you can do is just stack as much in your favor as you can. But by leaving out one of the decision makers, even if it's a small part of the decision, you're really you're rolling the dice.
Yeah. And it's funny because I was surprised at how opinionated my husband was when it came to home decor items. I thought that was my domain, but no, he has an opinion. So yeah, sometimes you don't even realize these people are decision makers, but they are.
You know what? And that's a great story. You can use that. Most people just need to know a reason why you're asking them to do something, right? So even in Influence, the book Influence, they talk about how if you just say because, I need this because, or I'm asking for this because, it doesn't even matter what you say after that. People just need a reason. But if you can give a story like that, like I thought my husband wasn't, could care less about this, but it turns out he does. And I had no idea. So this way it makes it easier for both people and everybody gets their questions answered. And it's an easier process. Everyone's happy about it. Nobody's, going into it with questions.
I love it. I love how passionate you are. I could just hear it in your voice. You're like, people, find out who the decision makers are and make sure they're in the room when you're there to close the sale.
And do you know why that is? Because I've lost lots of deals. I have lost so many. And over the years, I mean, you're going to lose more than you win, especially in the corporate world, because the percentages are way different. But you learn so much more from what you lose. And when you do lose, you lose hard and you never forget that. So oftentimes, especially in the creative space, people are so concerned about being nice and acquiescing to everything their clients want because they think that will help them. But at the end of the day, once they get burned, they'll never do that again. You know what I mean? So I try to cut them off at the pass and say, don't do this, or make sure you do this, because I promise you, if you do it anyway and you go against what I'm telling you and you get burned, you will never do it again.
Yeah.
But I don't want you to have to go through life like that, because when you get burned, you never forget it. And I remember some of my losses because they were monumental, and you just don't forget that, so you make it a rule. I will never, ever do this, because otherwise you roll the dice.
Yeah. And I think it's not so much creatives. I think, and I'm generalizing, women tend to do that a lot. We want to be nice. We want to not offend people. We want people to like us. We wait for permission and all those things. And it's not to say that you still can't be a nice human being and a decent human being, but it's having that confidence and realizing where your boundaries are, what your value is. I think that's really the key, and whether you're a man or a woman. But it's just, obviously we work with a lot of female entrepreneurs, and I just see that coming up more and more. I see it in myself sometimes. So it's something that I think we need to overcome so that we feel that we are getting the value that we deserve, that we work for. And sometimes you can't be so nice.
Absolutely. And you know what? I was exactly that way. And I still have a tendency to be that way. But I realized kind of by accident that by telling your client no, that you're actually building that boundary and they respect you more. And then they fall into line, and they're okay with it. So I've told clients to, tell your potential client no to what their ask is because it's unreasonable. Or they'll ask for a discount, for example. And I always tell them to say no, because I don't ever want you to discount. But they've learned that when you say no, it is so powerful. Like, you feel so good. And then the client is like 9 times out of 10, they're like, okay, all right, that's fine.
Yeah.
And they still hire them anyway. So it's amazing. And I never knew that early on. I wish I had known that.
It's funny because I can think of some people who they'll just always ask for a discount. Even if they've already decided they're going to work with them, they're like, let me just ask. And they usually get it because people are like, okay, fine, I'll discount. But it's part of their just process. But regardless of the answer, they're going to hire or purchase anyway. It's just they know how it works. And so that's just their MO. So I think that's even more important for you to be really clear on what your value is and stick to it. Because there are those people out there who will always ask because they don't care, because it usually works in their favor.
And that's so scary as a business owner, because if you've got like a big contract on the line or a big client or something that you've really been working for, and they say, oh yeah, well, if you can discount it 10%, we'll sign up now. That's really scary to say no to that, because they have this big contract in front of them and they really, really want it. And they think that, and I thought the same thing. So I'm right there with them. If you say no, you lose the business. And I'm not saying that that's never the case, but more often than not, because we've been taught as a society to expect discounts. I mean, everything you buy online or in a store is discounted at some point. So we teach people to expect that. But you have to be strong and know that you have to say no. Because if you open that door and you give them a discount in the beginning, guess what? They're going to keep asking for discounts and keep asking for more and more. So it's important to set that boundary. And here's a great tip. Instead of discounting, one of the things that I like to have my clients do, if they feel like they really do need to do something for the client. You know what I mean? Like they don't want a discount, but they want to do something to just show, okay, I'll have good faith, right? I have them add something, right? I'll throw in something that might be a high value to your client, but not necessarily a high value to you monetarily. So that's one way to, kind of give the client a feel good and feel like they got something. And then they're happy.
Yeah.
But that way you're not lowering your average value and you're not setting a precedent of discounting, because then you're saying that I don't value my services.
But I really do love free shipping. I'm not going to lie. And I always say, I'm totally going off on a tangent, but I would rather, like when you go and you check your bags and they charge you that darn baggage fee. You know what I'm talking about? I would rather pay, let's say my ticket was $100. I would rather pay $125 and get a free checked bag, even though at the end I'm spending the same amount. It's a $100 ticket plus a $25 baggage fee. I'm spending the same amount, but like mentally, I would really just love not to pay for my baggage fee or for shipping. So,
and that's a great example because people can do that. So if you bundle your pricing, you can add more of those things in it. So it looks like it's free, but you're not cutting into your margins, right? Or not devaluing yourself. It's just positioning at that point. But if you bake it into your overall cost, then that's fine. I don't mind that. It's just when you're discounting your services and devaluing who you are, that's a different story, because then that makes you like really just kind of pissy about it. And you don't want to serve the client in the same way as somebody else that paid full price. You know what I mean? But in the airline example, they're doing that because they want to be able to show that lowest price. And so everything else is just an add-on. So that's just a marketing and sales technique that, industries like that are using. Hotels are starting to do that more and more now too. So that's just a technique, which I don't personally care for, but
it really annoys me. It annoys me.
Yes.
I know. I had to go pay for my baggage fee the other day, and I was like, "Are you kidding me?" I was a member on one airline, but it was an affiliated airline, and so because I went on the affiliated airline, I didn't get the benefit of free baggage. Anyway, it just annoys me. It's not the $25. It just bugs me. But okay, now you guys all know I don't like to pay for baggage fees or shipping.
And that's a great example. So if you are someone's ideal client, know that about them. Know that they'd rather pay a slightly higher, quote unquote, ticket price, but have everything thrown in there versus having a lower price and charging a la carte for other things.
Yeah, I feel like I'm nickeled and dimed. Even though I get it, It's like you get to go a la carte. Maybe you don't need a baggage, you don't need to check in a bag or whatever. But I hate when, personally, so if anybody's trying to sell to me, just know I would rather know what my fee is, what's included. Don't nickel and dime me. I hate it. Okay. Because then I don't have the time for it. It's like, just tell me what I need and then just get it for me,
Exactly.
That's it. So, okay. I totally digressed there. But Maria,
those are good lessons. Great lessons.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it is just being aware of you as a consumer, what you like and how you like to be treated, what you respond to, and paying attention not only to other people's experience, but also your experience as a consumer. And I realize, and you could take those lessons from places like this airline example, like you said. It could be something, we're talking about airlines and baggage fees, but that could be something with the way you package your services or the way you bundle your products, like you said. So you could take these cues from so many different places, which is the reason why you never really stop working, because your brain is always going and taking in experiences and applying it to your business, or at least my brain works that way.
And you know what? One of the questions you had asked before was about how you know who your ideal client is and what they want and everything. One of the things that I think is so underused and underleveraged is going back to your past clients and have coffee with them, or buy them a drink or something, whatever, have breakfast. I don't care what it is, but get together with them and talk to them and ask them questions. You can send a survey, but again, just like when we were talking about the sales process, you can connect better when you're in person and you get more detailed information when you're in person. So when you do that, you will get a wealth of information and ideas. You can ask them, what else should I be offering? Or should I be doing something a little bit differently? Or what other ideas do you have? Or who else should I be speaking to? I ask my clients all the time for ideas. and what their feedback is about my program and how could I make it better? Or what's another way, or what's another type of class I could offer that I'm not even thinking about? People don't do that. And big brands do that constantly. I feel like, and this is not going to be super popular, but I know that there's so many people out there in the online space that are talking about creating your ideal client profile and basically making it up, right? Like just creating it out of your brain and just do a story on your perfect client, And that's not what brands do. Brands go out and they talk to their clients and they find out, how are you using my product? What are you using it for? What do you like best? What don't you like? What would you change? How can we grow? All of those questions. That's how they develop their brand. That's how they develop their products and services. So why shouldn't we do the same?
I agree with you, because I always, those exercises always bugged me, because there's this internal bias, right? Because you're like, well, I'm selling X. And so, of course, Sally Jones, who goes to Starbucks every day, is thinking about, that whatever it is I'm selling all the time, which may not be where they're at, and their mindset's not there. And so you won't know unless you actually talk to quote unquote Sally Jones, who goes to Starbucks, and find out if they are thinking about whatever product you're selling and what their concerns are there.
Yeah. Here's another thing. I just thought of this at the top of my head. One of the things that I just started implementing as a matter of process is when somebody joins my program, I have them fill out a survey and I ask them questions about, like, what made you decide to join now? What were some of the concerns you had prior to joining? Just to try to elicit, why did they join? What were they looking for? What were the challenges they were having? What were they struggling with? What was the trigger? Anything like that helps you get better insight into your client and why they need you and why they need you right now. And if you put that into your process so that it's an automatic, then you'll automatically get that feedback from people all the time and get that refreshed information as you go through your business. So that's one method that people can go through, especially if you have like online sales or anything like that, that's really conducive to like an online survey versus let's meet for coffee and talk. That's a great way to do it.
Oh, so good. I can't wait to go back and listen to this episode and take notes. I'm such a nerd. It's like all these good things that I'm like, I can't forget them. So if you're listening to this, go back and listen again and take notes this time, because I think Maria is giving us such gems and golden nuggets, and you could take, even if you take one of the things she's mentioned today and implement, I think you can see a difference in your approach when working with and booking clients. So, Maria, thank you. And actually, Maria and I are going to be speaking at the end of December 2017, right? We're in 2017. Yeah, we are.
Yes.
Can't even think that far ahead. But we're both going to be speaking at the B-Sage conference. I'm going to link that up in the show notes after this episode. So if you guys want to come in, learn more from Maria, want to come hang out with me and some other great industry professionals, we'd love to see you in Hilton Head, South Carolina.
I cannot wait. You know how great that's going to be when I'm coming from Chicago in December?
I've never been. My husband and I always joke about moving to the Carolinas. So I'm excited to come and check it out. I've heard it's beautiful. So I can't wait. Well, Maria, we've been talking for a really long time, which always happens when we get on the phone and start chatting. But so I think it's time to close this off, wrap it up. And I want to wrap it up with the question I ask all of my guests, which is the one thing I know for sure is, and I ask you to fill in the blank.
So the one thing I know for sure is that decisions I make in my life and my business are always easier when I look at them through the lens of maintaining my integrity. Right. So like things I used to struggle with are, clients would come to me and they'd say, oh, can I have a discount on your program or your services? Or somebody would ask me to speak at their event for free, for example. And I would be so torn, like, oh, I just want to be nice, just like we were talking about earlier. Yeah. And I would struggle with that. And then it hit me. I'm like, dummy. First of all, what I teach in my class is you don't devalue yourself. So once I made that connection and said, you know what, I need to practice what I preach. And so the answer is a blanket no, unless I'm doing something for charity or it's my gift to somebody. That's a different story. But now when somebody asks me that, I just have the same answer. And I say, you know what, it's easier for me. I don't have to think about it anymore because I know it's aligned with my integrity and who I am. And I'm practicing what I preach. So I just tell people that, I wouldn't be practicing what I preach if I do that for you and not for every other client that I have, So I find that decisions are so much easier when you look at it from the lens of what's important to you. And to me, my integrity is everything. And that's one of the things my father taught me. And I never want that ruined. So I make my decisions through that lens.
I love it. I love you, Maria. You're awesome. You have a lot of integrity.
I hope my dad would be proud of me.
I'm sure he is. Well, with that said, Maria, thanks again for being here. I'm going to link up to all of your fabulous resources in the show notes, and I can't wait to see you in December.
Yes, hopefully sooner.
I know. We got to make it happen. We'll figure it out.
Thanks for having me. I've so enjoyed talking with you, as I do always.
So there you go. I hope you guys got a lot of value, because I know I do. Whenever I talk to Maria, she always highlights something that I have maybe forgotten or haven't thought about. My biggest takeaway is that we need to teach our clients how to evaluate someone like you that does the work that you do, and that it's not just so black and white, and we're not commodities. And I think that really comes down to really recognizing and acknowledging your value and being able to communicate that to your prospective clients. So I want to know, what are some of the sales tips that Maria shared that you're going to begin implementing today? Let me know by heading on over to our Facebook group. If you don't know, we have a Facebook group called Office Talk, where we continue the conversations that we're having here on the podcast over in a forum where we can help and support one another. You can find that over at AnnetteStepani.com/join. Also, you can grab all the show notes and the links, including how you can connect with Maria and learn more about her Irresistible Selling course, as well as the B-Sage conference where we're both going to be speaking in December of 2017. Those are all going to be available over at AnnetteStepani.com/podcast/27. So we've reached that point in the episode where I'm going to wish you a fantastic day, and I can't wait to talk to you later.